King's approach to liberation theology, I believe, is based on love. King states that of all of Jesus' command, the command to love one's enemies is the most difficult to follow in practice. King looks not only at the question of how, but also why should we love our enemies, concluding with the offered observation that love is the most durable power in the world. Love, being a creative and transformative force, is the greatest hope for a lasting and meaningful peace. Let's look at Dr. King's commitment. Dr. King was committed to his theology, I believe, based upon love, his liberation theology based on love. He risked not only the unpopularity among the dominant white culture. Of course, this is well known, but he also risked popularity among his own people, his own community. And many even tried to use this against him, but he was committed to this premise to love your enemies, and to nonviolence. And in King's collection of sermons, his last sermon was The Road and the Pilgrimage of Nonviolence. Here he was committed to this premise that he was influenced by Gandhi and other people to nonviolence. And of course, he had proved it in the Montgomery boycott that nonviolence could have a far-reaching effect. And of course, nonviolence had to be based on the fact that you had to be able to love your enemies. And he uses and brings forth the command of Jesus to love your enemies. Now, many thought this was foolish. Many philosophers like Nietzsche thought this was foolish and that it was for those who are weak. But that's not how Dr. King looked at it. Dr. King looked at this as the point of that this was the solution to the world's problem. He was not saying Jesus was some utopian dreamer or some unrealistic thinker, but he was actually pointing that Jesus was showing very practically that in order for us to have a successful society and world, we had to know how to forgive our enemies and love those who despitefully used us. King believed this. He believed this wholeheartedly, that you must love your enemy. You must love those who dislike you, who disagree with you, who resist you. He felt this was the core of his movement, the core to love his enemy, that you could love your enemy, show them the right attitude, the right actions to help them to come around to what he believed. And at the core of this loving your enemy, King spoke of the philosophy of forgiveness. You had to learn to forgive. You had to forgive if you were going to have love. And if you had the capacity to forgive, he goes on and continues on, then you have the capacity to have new relationships, to have new beginnings, right? So King's philosophy and theology of liberation, in my thoughts and ideas, was based upon love. Well, we've heard from Dr. Garth, we heard from Sobrano, and we heard from Yoder, Dr. King. What's my approach to liberation theology? Well, my personal approach to liberation theology is the necessity of cultural engagement. And I base this on Matthew chapter 35, and in particular where Jesus had compassion on people. He had compassion. He was engaged with the people because of the compassion he had for them. And that word compassion in the text compelled Jesus to take action. It was a deep feeling. It was a deep bowel kind of feeling that this word denotes. And it was such a feeling, it urged you to take action. You could not take action if you really had the compassion of Jesus. This same word is used in other texts in Matthew 14:14, Mark 6:34, Luke 7:13, 10 and 33, and Luke 15 and 20, of the Good Samaritan and of the prodigal son's father. They took action to have a positive outcome. And I believe it is our responsibility, it is incumbent upon us that we must engage society, no matter if it's for social justice, the arts, education, government, the poor, for public policy, economic policy, healthcare, wherever there is a need for good to be done, good people should act. And I conclude with this: we are all accountable. Dr. King once said, we shall have to repent in this generation, not so much for the evil deeds of wicked people, but for the appalling silence of good people. We must act. We must engage. Well, to conclude, we looked at various liberation theologies, from Dr. Garth to Sobrano. We compared Yoder and King, and they both were somewhat pacifist in their approach. But Yoder definitely believed that the church had a responsibility to speak to the state in a corrective sense. Dr. King believed that our engagement had to be based on love and nonviolence. And I believe that our engagement of to society and our liberation theology, to the point that we have to be culturally engaged in order to help make a difference and be compassionate about the needs of people. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you have benefited from my discussion of the theology of liberation.